3 days. That is all it took to find out which of my sons truly loved me, and which ones only loved what I stood to leave behind. I staged losing everything: the 40-year construction business, the savings, the house I built with my own 2 hands. I walked up to each of my boys' front doors, looking like a man the world had finished with. My 2 successful sons pressed some bills into my palm and stepped back inside before I finished my second sentence. My youngest, an electrician who drives a truck with a cracked windshield and eats lunch from a cooler, pulled me through his front door like I was something precious he'd nearly lost. His wife handed me hot coffee before she even knew my name. The next morning, when my attorney arrived with a briefcase full of legal documents, the expressions on my older sons' faces told me everything I needed to know about the men I had raised. Let me start from the beginning. I am 67 years old. I spent 4 decades building Malone Construction and contract from a one-man operation out of a rented pickup truck into a company with 14 employees and a reputation that meant something. My wife, Bess, stood beside me through every slow season, every overextended line of credit, every 3 a.m. conversation about whether we had made a terrible mistake betting our whole lives on a foundation of concrete and timber. We had not. By the time I sold the business and retired, we were comfortable. Not penthouse comfortable, but the kind of comfortable that means you stop worrying about the electricity bill and start worrying about other things instead. Bess passed 9 years ago from pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. The house I built for her in a quiet subdivision outside Nashville has been too large and too quiet ever since. Our 3 sons grew up in that house. Dixon, the oldest, left for Duke on an academic scholarship and never really came back except for holidays. He went into real estate development in Charlotte, married a woman whose jewelry budget could choke a horse, and built the kind of life that photographs well. Trace, our middle son, went to Vanderbilt for finance and ended up as a senior advisor at a private wealth management firm in Houston. He wore a watch to his mother's funeral that cost more than my first work truck. Jesse, our youngest, chose trade school instead of a 4-year university and became a licensed electrician. He lives in Greenville, Tennessee, about 2 hours east of Nashville, in a rented house on a street where neighbors wave at each other in the morning. He married Gemma, who works as a home health aide for elderly patients. They do not have a lot. They have never once asked me for anything. The calls that changed everything came on a Tuesday night in October. Dixon called first. He did not ask how I was sleeping. He did not mention that we hadn't spoken in 3 months. He told me about a commercial land deal near a new interchange in the Carolinas and explained that he needed $120,000 to lock in his share before the weekend. "It's a solid move, Dad," he said. "You'd be helping yourself too. This will double." He spoke about money the way he always does, with the confidence of a man who has never actually needed mine, which made asking for it feel worse somehow. I told him I'd think about it. Trace called 40 minutes later, a partnership opportunity at his firm, a chance to buy into the senior tier, $75,000. "It accelerates the timeline," he said. "Otherwise I wait another 4 years." He described it the way you describe a bus you are about to miss, not a conversation you are having with your father. He did not ask about my knee, which had been bothering me for months, and which I had mentioned the last time we talked. I told him I'd think about it. Jesse called just before 9. He apologized for calling late. He asked whether I was eating enough, whether the physical therapy had helped, whether I'd been getting out of the house now that the weather was cooler. We talked for almost half an hour about nothing that mattered and everything that did: his work, a tricky job rewiring an old farmhouse, Gemma's patience, whether I had plans for Thanksgiving. When we said goodbye, he told me he loved me. He said it the way you say something that costs nothing, because it is simply true. I sat in Bess's kitchen for a long time after that third call. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a while. Prentice Holcomb had been my attorney for 31 years. He had handled the business sale, 2 real estate transactions, and the legal aftermath of Bess's death. He was 63 years old, careful, and knew how to keep a secret. "Prentice," I said when he picked up, "I need your help with something that will sound strange." He waited. "I want to disappear for a few days," I said. "Not forever. just long enough to show up at my son's doors with nothing and see what they do. He tried to talk me out of it. Then, when that didn't work, he started taking notes. We spent 2 hours going over the plan. A prepaid phone with no traceable number. A car parked 2 blocks from wherever I ended up, with a driver who would sit there around the clock in case I needed pulling out. Prentice would contact Dixon and Trace and tell them only that their father had suffered a financial crisis and wanted to see them. No explanation, no preparation. He would tell them to come to Jesse's address by 9 the following morning after my visit there. Nothing more. The night before I left, I stood in my closet for a long time. Then I put on an old pair of work pants from a bin in the garage, a faded thermal shirt, a canvas jacket with a torn pocket, and the pair of work boots I had worn on job sites in 1998. They still fit. I did not shave. I took the prepaid phone, 2 folded 20s, and a water bottle, and I walked out of the house I had built. The first night I spent near the Greyhound terminal on Charlotte Avenue in Nashville. I had been to that part of the city hundreds of times, to bid jobs, to meet clients, to stop at the hardware store on the corner. I had never seen it from a bench at 2 in the morning, cold enough to bite, with no option but to sit with my aching knee stretched out in front of me and wait for the sun. Around midnight, a woman settled onto the far end of my bench. She was somewhere in her mid-50s and wore her clothes the way people wear armor, layered, deliberate, nothing wasted. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were sharp and tired in equal measure. "First time," she said. It was not a question. I didn't answer right away. "You still look like you belong somewhere," she said. "That goes away." Her name was Odessa. She had worked as a medical billing clerk for 22 years. A husband who left, an apartment she could not keep on one income, a daughter in Atlanta who had moved twice without passing on her new address. She stopped answering calls about the time I stopped being able to pay for anything, Odessa said. I think it's easier for her that way. She did not say it with bitterness. She said it the way you describe weather, something that happens, something you learn to live inside of. We sat in silence for a while. She had half a granola bar that she broke without being asked and held out to me. I took my half and said thank you, and meant it in a way I hadn't meant simple words in a very long time. "You ever think about contacting your daughter?" I asked. "Every day," Odessa said. "But what would I say? I'm still here in case you were wondering." She looked past me toward the street. She made her choice. I made mine. The thing about having nothing is you stop pretending. You cannot afford to pretend anymore. I thought about that for the rest of the night. I reached Charlotte the next afternoon. Dixon's house. I had helped finance it, though he rarely mentioned that now, sat inside a gated community in the southern part of the city. 4 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a backyard that backed to a small pond. When I pressed the intercom at the gate, his voice came through clipped and incurious. "Who is it?" "It's your father." Long pause. "That's not funny. It's not a joke." He opened the gate. By the time I reached the front door, he was standing in it wearing a fleece vest and khakis, holding a glass of something amber. He looked at me the way you look at a car accident, not with compassion, but with assessment. "Dad," flat, his eyes moved over my clothes, my face, my boots. "What happened to you?" I told him the same story I had prepared. The business gone, the savings gone, 3 nights outside, I needed somewhere to stay. His jaw tightened. He glanced past me toward the street. "My daughter-in-law's mother is coming for dinner tonight," he said. "We have had it planned for 3 weeks. He said it the way you describe a scheduled surgery, immovable, consequential. "I won't be any trouble," I said. He stepped back, not to let me in but to move the conversation away from the sight line of the neighbors. "Dad, I don't understand how this happened. You had the business proceeds, you had investments. Where did it go?" The question was not concern. It was accounting. "Mistakes," I said. "You should have been more careful." He said it the way you say, something you have believed for a long time. "You should have had things structured differently." He disappeared inside for a few minutes. When he came back, he held 3 $20 bills. He pressed them into my hand without meeting my eyes. "There's a Motel 6 on the interstate about 4 miles east," he said. "This should cover it." $60. I looked at it. "I wish I could do more," he said. "I really do. Tonight is not a good night." He closed the door. I heard the deadbolt engage. I stood on his front step for a moment, listening to the sounds of his dinner being prepared inside. Then I walked back down the driveway. Trace's apartment in Houston was on the 14th floor of a glass building near the Galleria. The lobby had a concierge who looked at me with the practiced expression of someone trained to redirect people like me without making a visible scene. I asked him to call up to my son's unit. The elevator ride up was long. Trace answered his door in a business shirt with the sleeves rolled up, phone already in his hand. He looked at me and went very still. "Dad," a beat. He glanced down the hallway as if checking whether his neighbors were watching. "What?" I gave him the same story. Business gone, savings gone, 3 nights outside. He listened with his arms crossed. He nodded once or twice the way he nods in client meetings. When I finished, he said, "I have a client event tonight. It's been on the calendar for months." He exhaled. "Why didn't you call first? Why just show up?" "I didn't know where else to go," I said. He pulled out his wallet. 5 20s, counted out with the same expression he probably uses when settling a restaurant tab. "There's a Marriott about 8 blocks from here," he said. "Extended stay rate. I can look into some options for you tomorrow. There are resources, community organizations, that kind of thing." Resources, organizations, like reading from a pamphlet. "Can we just sit down for a minute?" I asked. "Tonight is really..." He stopped. "I can't tonight, Dad, I'm sorry." The elevator doors closed on his face. I left Houston that same evening. By the time I reached Greenville, it was past 9 o'clock, and the streets were dark and cool with the particular quiet of small towns on weeknights. Jesse's rented house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, pale gray siding, a porch with a plastic chair and a potted plant that was doing its best. His work truck was parked in the driveway, a white F-150 with a magnetic sign on the door, Malone Electric, licensed and insured. He had used my last name for his business. I had not known that until this moment. I knocked. The door opened, and Gemma looked at me for 1 second before something behind her eyes moved from surprise directly into action. She was young, maybe 30, wearing an oversized sweatshirt. She had kind eyes, not worried eyes, not suspicious, kind ones. "Oh, come inside," she said, and her hand was already on my arm. "Come inside right now, you're frozen." She looked at my boots. Jesse, come out here." The house was warm. It smelled like something with onions and garlic was on the stove. There were books on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle on a folding table by the window, 2 pairs of shoes beside the door. Evidence of people living an actual life together, not performing one. Jesse appeared from the back of the house, still in his work clothes, gray Henley, canvas pants with a smear of something on the knee. When he saw me, he went still for just a moment. Then he crossed the room in 3 steps. "Dad." He did not ask what I was doing there. He did not ask why I looked the way I did. He said, "Are you hurt? Did something happen to you?" "I'm all right," I said. "I've had a hard few days." He put his hand on my shoulder and steered me toward the couch. He sat beside me, not across from me, beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, the way he used to sit in the pickup when he was 8, and we drove to the hardware store on Saturday mornings. They fed me. Chicken stew with cornbread, cheap and hot, and better than anything I had eaten in 3 days. Gemma asked no questions. Jesse asked only whether I was warm enough, whether I wanted more. When I finished, Gemma said, "You're sleeping in our room tonight." And when I started to protest, she held up one hand with a firmness that was kind rather than sharp. "That's not something we're going to argue about." That night, lying in my son's bed in the quiet of his small house, I could not sleep. And then I heard their voices from down the hall. They thought I was asleep. They were speaking low, not whispering, but careful. I could make out every word without trying. "Are you sure?" Jesse was asking. "Positive," Gemma said. "I took 3 of them." A pause. "Jess, we're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was the kind that comes before something enormous settles into place. "Oh Lord," Jesse said, and then quieter, like something breaking open. "Oh, Gemma." I heard him pull her close. I heard her say, "It's okay, it's good, we're going to be okay." And then the practical conversation came, the one every young couple has in a moment like that, and I was not prepared for what I heard. "We don't have insurance," Jesse said. "I know." The prenatal costs alone. I know. I've been looking at numbers. A pause. I had about 2,000 set aside. I was saving it towards something else. We can use it for the first appointments and set up a payment plan for the rest. 2,000 won't last long. Then I'll sell the truck, Gemma said. Complete quiet. Jess, listen to me. Your father came to our door with nothing. He has nothing right now. Your truck is how we pay our bills. I know exactly what it is, and I'm telling you, if we need to sell it to make sure he's safe, we sell it and figure the rest out later. There are ways to keep working. You can rent, you can borrow, we'll find something. Gem, that's my whole. He's your father, she said simply. The silence stretched, then Jessie said, okay. Just that. Okay. I lay in the dark with my hand pressed over my mouth and wept in a way I had not wept since the morning Bess died. Not from grief, from something else entirely, from the unbearable leveling weight of being loved well by someone who had every reason in the world to look out for themselves first, and chose not to. I stayed awake the rest of the night. In the morning, Gemma was already in the kitchen when I came out. She set a cup of coffee in front of me and sat across the table and looked at me for a long moment. How long have you known? She asked quietly. I set down the cup. Known what? She smiled, a small, patient smile. I noticed some things last night, she said. The way you hold yourself, the way you talked about money like someone who understands it from the inside, not the outside. The calluses on your hands are old, but they're not the right kind. She folded her hands on the table. I don't need you to tell me anything. I just want you to understand something. It doesn't change what we did. We would have done exactly the same thing if all of it had been real. I looked at my youngest son's wife, this woman I had met exactly once before, at their wedding 4 years ago, and I understood without question why Jessie had chosen her. I know you would have, I said. That's the entire point. Prentice arrived at 9:30. His car pulled up behind 2 others, Dixon's Range Rover and Trace's BMW, both of which Prentice had arranged through a single strategic phone call the evening before. My older sons climbed out looking pressed and uncertain, and stopped when they saw me standing on the porch in Jessie's borrowed clothes. They saw Prentice in his suit with his briefcase. They saw Jessie beside me with his hand on my shoulder, and Gemma just behind, and I watched their faces process what they were looking at. Dad, Dixon said carefully, what is this? Come inside, I said. It's time we talked. We stood in Jessie's small living room, 6 of us, in a space built for one family's ordinary evenings, and I looked at all 3 of my sons at once for the first time in years. I wasn't broke, I said. I staged it. Prentice opened the briefcase. Financial statements, legal documents, a certified letter from the firm that had purchased Malone Construction. The company had done well. My investments had done well. I was not a desperate man. Dixon's face went pale. Trace looked at the floor. I came to each of you with nothing, I said. Dixon, you gave me $60 and told me you had dinner guests. Trace, you gave me $100 and mentioned a Marriott 8 blocks away. I understand the math you were both doing. I was an inconvenience, a problem to be managed at minimal cost and moved along. Neither of them spoke. Jace took me in, I said. Gemma made me stew and gave me their bed. And last night, lying in that bed, I overheard the 2 of them learn that they are going to have a baby. I let that settle. No insurance, no savings to fall back on. And Gemma told my son they should sell his work truck, the one thing that earns their living, if that is what it took to take care of me. Dixon looked at Jessie. Something shifted in his face, something complicated and slow. Prentice has the documents, I said. My estate is worth approximately $4.4 million. The majority of it is going to Jessie and Gemma, placed in a trust for their family and the child coming. The 2 of you will receive a portion as well, but with conditions. I told them, family counseling, once a month for 1 full year, community service with an organization that works directly with people experiencing homelessness, not a donation, not writing a check but showing up and working, and a real conversation with their brother, not a performance, a real one. This is not punishment, I said. If I believed punishment was what you needed, I would have left you nothing. This is me, finally doing what I should have done 30 years ago. After the paperwork was signed, and Dixon and Trace had driven away with their conditions and their inheritance and their instructions, I took Jesse outside onto the porch. I handed him an envelope. He opened it. Inside was the title to a 2021 F-150, white, same as his current truck, but without the cracked windshield, purchased 2 mornings ago at a dealership in Nashville, the morning after I had made my decision in the dark and knew already how the rest would go. Jesse looked at the title for a long time, then he looked at me. "You were going to sell the one you had," I said, "so now you have 2. He hugged me the way men hug when they stop pretending they do not need to. I held on to my youngest son on his rented porch in Greenville, Tennessee, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been knotted there for 9 years. 2 years have passed since that morning. Dixon completed his counseling. It took about 8 months before I heard something genuine in his voice when he called, something not connected to what he might eventually inherit. He has been volunteering at a transitional housing facility in Charlotte on the first Saturday of every month. He called me last week just to say he had been thinking about his mother and wanted to tell me that. Trace left the wealth management firm. He joined a smaller financial planning practice that works primarily with people who cannot afford high-end advice, teachers, electricians, families who need someone in their corner without a $300 hourly rate. He told me it was a significant pay cut. He sounded lighter than I had heard him sound in a decade. Jesse and Gemma's son was born in the spring, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with Gemma's stubbornness and Jesse's quiet eyes. They named him Forrest, after no one in particular, they said, just because it sounded like a name that could grow into anything. I was in the waiting room when he arrived. I held him before he was an hour old and thought about Bess, how she would have worn out her phone camera, how she would have said, "There he is." That's the one, the way she said it about every new baby she ever met. I have been spending more time in Greenville. I rented a small place not far from Jesse's house. It is smaller than any room in the Nashville house, and I like it better than I ever would have predicted. Odessa, the woman from the bench outside the Greyhound terminal. I thought about her for months after. I had Prentice find her. It took 3 weeks. She was still in Nashville, still in the same general area. I set up a housing voucher through a local nonprofit and made sure there was a position waiting for her in the billing department of a medical office downtown, a role I helped fund through a donation to their operating budget. She did not know the money came from me. I hope she thinks the world just turned around one day and landed facing a different direction. Maybe that is what I should have understood 40 years ago, when the business was just me and a rented truck and a phone that rang too infrequently. That the world can turn around, that people can change the direction they are headed, that it is never as late as it feels on a bench at 2 in the morning. But sometimes it takes losing everything, even if only on paper, even if only for 3 cold days, to finally see what you actually have. I had 3 sons. I raised all 3 of them in the same house, with the same chances, the same father, the same examples, and somehow one of them already understood the thing that took me a lifetime to learn. That love is not a transaction. It is not a ledger with 2 columns that have to balance. It is not something you protect because of what comes back when you give it. Love is a work truck you are willing to sell for a man you think is a stranger on the same night you find out you are bringing a child into the world. I know that now. I wish it had not taken me this long to get here.